I think we can all agree that our past helps shape who we are in the present day, and that we should all take some responsibility for our own actions and our own past. And yet, if you look at my Facebook feed, it only really shows the good things that happen to me, or the things that I really feel like talking about. It rarely shows when I've done something wrong, or when my life just didn't live up to expectations. But the thing is, it's the bad things as well as the good things that have made me the person that I am. It's almost like I'm trying to hide the bad stuff. And it's the same with national histories. We really only want to talk about the good stuff that's happened. Jana,
Hello,
hi.
Daniel.
Good to see you.
Yes, good to
So
see you.
apparently this is Captain Cook's house.
Yes,
I spoke to Jana Thompson about our responsibility for our past. Yeah, well, let's have a seat.
Yeah, let me park my bicycle. I think you first have to think about how the term responsibility is used. I think there are two meanings. One, of course, is you have responsibility for what you did. And if you're guilty of a crime, for example, you're responsible for it. But there's another sense of responsibility where you have to take responsibility for what others did. After all, parents sometimes have to take responsibility for what their children do. And that taking responsibility has to do with your being related to another person or a group in such a way that you have to be the one who pays the debt that they've incurred or apologizes for what they've done. We have to take responsibility because we're the citizens of a country that, well, you could say is a kind of an intergenerational person. A nation state makes decisions and carries out actions because of the way it's organized. And it's an intergenerational association, so like a person, it has to take responsibility for what it does in its past, which extends beyond the lifetime of present people. And as citizens of this state, we have to bear our share of this taking responsibility.
Taking responsibility doesn't have to mean judging yourself to be a bad person. It's more about owning your past so that you might learn from it. And if you're going to own your history, you've got to take the whole lot, the good and the bad. I spoke with Jana Thompson about why people don't like to remember the bad parts of their history.
They want to be proud of their ancestors, and if they thought that if it's brought out, or if they thought that their ancestors were involved in doing horrible things to Aborigines, well, then they might feel that their family history has been somehow tainted. So I think that's one thing. And I think that people want their national history to be a good one. They want it to be a heroic one, one they can be proud of. But there are always things in a national history that we can't be so proud of. One of my things I used to say, well, if you're proud of your country's past, if you want to take pride in your country's past, then you really have to also take into account the things that you can't be so proud of.
We're not very good at facing up to the facts of our history. And when we do, you know, we tend to whitewash it. We paint over the cracks. And we try to say, well, you know, on balance, what we did was pretty good. You know. What we did was actually bloody horrible. And we ought to own up to that and then map out a path for the future together.
So, if our present is shaped by the good and the bad in our history, we need to find out what the bad stuff is before we can take responsibility for it. I asked anthropologist Marsha Langton which past injustice she saw as having the greatest impact on current Indigenous Australians.
I think the outstanding historical injustice, which requires some form of recompense, is the injustice caused to people who were removed from their families as children.
The stolen generations was an injustice. We can see that now. At the time, however, some of the perpetrators might not have appreciated that what they were doing was unjust.
When these injustices actually occurred, many people thought that by taking away children from Aboriginal parents, they were doing the right thing. People don't take care of their children all right, or, you know, we want to integrate them into mainstream society, and that's a good thing to do, surely. And I think you have to allow the people in their times. I mean, we probably are the same. We're probably influenced by all sorts of things, and maybe our descendants will say, they did that, and they thought it was okay. They ate meat? How could they have done that? Who knows what our descendants will say of us? So you can say, well, look, my ancestors are just people of their times. And they weren't saints, but they weren't really, they weren't demons either. But now we have good reason to think that what they did was unjust. And it's our view that we have to use in order to say what's just and unjust. And we think we have good reasons for doing that.
The past has a very real impact on the present day. Historic injustices are rarely the kind of isolated, terrible incidents that we can now look back on and say, well, at least it's all over now. When injustice involves loss of property, parents, and culture, it leaves a legacy, an enduring system of injustice that lasts in the present day. I spoke to Marsha Langton about the effects on the stolen generations.
The ongoing trauma that those forcible removals caused are evident in health problems, particularly mental health problems, problems with maintaining functional families. You find that many of the Indigenous people in prison are either victims of forcible removals or come from families that have been affected by forcible removals. In fact, it's very difficult to find an Aboriginal person who isn't in some way affected by that terrible policy.
People make excuses for not wanting to address this. Oh, it's all in the past, it's historic, it's over. It's not over. But there's a great discomfort about owning up to this. And we're not asking people to feel guilty about this. You know, we certainly ought to be ashamed of it. But no Aboriginal person's asking people to feel guilty about this, not that I know of. We're saying let's face up to the truth of our history. And until we do that, we can't go forward.
People who have suffered for a history of injustice as, you know, descendants of American slaves or Aborigines, that they often feel alienated and distrustful, and they have what one philosopher called a broken history. And that's hard to manage, and that can be very upsetting. So some of the harms are psychological, and therefore the ways of repairing them have to do with finding ways of establishing better relations where people feel that they can trust. And that's one of the functions, I think, that apology, if it's well done, can fulfill.
But does apologising really make a difference? Can a few words have any real impact? In 2008, the Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, apologised to the stolen generations on behalf of all Australians. Marsha Langton attended Parliament on that day and tells us about the experience she had.
The Clerk.
Government business, notice number 1, motion offering an apology to Australia's Indigenous peoples.
I thought, you know, in the morning before I arrived at Parliament House in Canberra that, you know, I would simply be experiencing yet another boring political speech and that I'd fly home in the afternoon and nothing would have changed. I couldn't have been more wrong. There were hundreds of people outside on the lawns of Parliament House, and I didn't expect that. People came from all over the country, and I realised the enormity of the gesture by day's end. I was also emotionally affected, and I actually had to leave Parliament House, and I went and had a cup of tea with people who had been very severely affected by the policy. Everyone felt, from what I could tell from what they were saying to me, that the apology was the most important acknowledgement that they'd ever received of the suffering and harm that had been done to them, and that what had been done to them was wrong. And that is what they wanted to hear more than anything else.
To the stolen generations, I say the following. As Prime Minister of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Government of Australia, I am sorry. On behalf of the Parliament of Australia, I am sorry. And I offer you this apology without qualification.
You know, every country's got their dark histories. I think we all have an obligation as citizens of this wonderful country to shine some light on that darkness.
Taking responsibility for something isn't always about saying that you personally did something bad. Sometimes it's just about recognising that bad things happen, just like good things happen, and that we can learn something from this. This includes the case of historical injustice and the kind of impact that it has on present-day descendants. But what should we do next? Well, a good start would be to stop denying the darker parts of our history. Apologising for past wrongs goes some way towards recognising historic injustice and laying a foundation for correcting ongoing injustices. And it means there's something more genuine, less selective about the pride that we rightly feel about the good things that have happened. What do you think? Next time, what should be done when religious moral codes clash?